Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight we have a story from one of our viewers who grew up in North Carolina in the 1980s. And there he went camping with a couple of his buddies and their younger brother. And that night, while camping, they had an extremely terrifying experience. That's next. Okay, so I am high up in the Sierra tonight. Enjoyed a really nice hike this afternoon out here, and it's amazing weather. I got an amazing view behind me, and I have a beer tonight. This is really interesting. It's called High Water Brewing Campfire Stout. It's got a waterfall, a campfire, a bear on it, and it says stout with graham crackers, molasses, and other natural flavors. I don't think I'd be drinking a beer with graham crackers and molasses. It says leaves you wanting s'more. The s'more the merrier. Let's check this out. Oh, got some elevation going on. I am pretty high up here. Ugh. There we go. Oh, it's dark. It is a dark beer. Oh, dark and sudsy. That is interesting. Interesting, bordering on, I'm not sure I like it. It's going to take some getting used to. I had to put this in a little spring down below, get it nice and cooled off. It seemed to worked. That's actually pretty good. It's very interesting. Campfire Stout. Okay, so this story takes place in the 1980s in central North Carolina, and it's from one of our viewers. His name is Nate. Nate enjoyed camping, he enjoyed the outdoors. It was late spring, May, and he wanted to go camping with a couple of his buddies, Rick and Steve. And they were ready to go, and at the last minute, Steve's dad said, "Can you bring your 10-year-old brother, Ben?" And they, okay, we can take Ben, reluctantly. And so there was 4 of them. And they went to this place called the Rocky River. Big bend in the river, and there was cliffs on one side right at the bend, and it tapered off into this pretty thick forest there. And right there above the bend was a ford, a crossing where you could cross the river, and it had a history of being used during the Civil War and some years after that, of where they would cross the river and they didn't need a bridge. It had to be certain times of the year, obviously, when you're fording a river, but that's what they did. It also had a history with Native Americans. Up near the cliff, people had found pottery shards and arrowheads up there over the years, and so they had used this crossing as well. To get to this location, they had to drive through the forest for a few miles, get to the end of this road, park the vehicle, and then hike down this trail to the river. So they did that, had all their gear, brought it down, and they set up their camp down along the river. They made a campfire pit from river rock, had their tent set up, ate a little bit of food, and decided in the early evening to go up to the cliffs and explore and maybe see if they could find some arrowheads. Had some fun exploring, trekking around. Sun was going down. They decided to head back to camp. And when they got back to camp, they noticed it was really quiet. They could hear the river rushing, and that was it. There was no squirrels, frogs, birds. Whatever they heard earlier that day, it was now dead quiet. And it was very noticeable. Nate noticed it, and then Steve and Rick also mentioned it, and they talked about, yeah, we kind of noticed that as well. They thought it was odd not hearing any sounds decided to settle in for the night around their campfire. It made a nice fire pit and just talk about school ending, summer coming up, their plans, and just enjoy the evening and just horsing around as teenagers would do. They could still hear just the river and themselves talking. This went on for a few minutes. Then down by the crossing on the opposite side of the river was about 25-30 yards wide, they heard in the middle of the river, it sounded like a large rock was thrown in the river. This splash, kerplunk sound. There's a very distinct sound of that. It's the rock landing and then the water coming out, it kerplunk, splash. And it startled them. And they're sitting there listening. It's dead quiet except for the river. They don't hear anything else. And then they start to talk about it, like, what was that? And somebody said maybe it was a dead tree branch that fell off a tree and just fell in the river. Just some kind of a natural sound that we heard. And then someone else said, nobody knows that we're down here. I couldn't imagine somebody on the other side of the river, there's no road over that, messing with us. So they thought, okay, it's just something just happened, tree branch or something. So they went back to a conversation, enjoying the evening, really nice fire going. Stars are out, very calm night, very thick forest though. About 20 minutes later, they hear the same thing again. This loud kerplunk splash of a rock thrown into the river, because this time they could hear what sounded like a rock going through the trees on the other side of the river and land in the middle of the river. Rick got up, picked up an extra rock from their fire pit, about the size of a softball, and he went to the edge of their camp and threw it into the night towards the river through the trees. And they could hear it splash right in the river. Right then, they could hear something running through the forest on the other side of the river. Something large. And right away they thought, this is somebody messing with us. So the three boys got up and picked up more rocks and started throwing them into the river and screaming and yelling and whooping it up and laughing and trying to scare whoever was messing with them. Right then, Ben had just had enough. It was too strange for him. He's 10 years old, so he went into a tent, zipped himself in, and he could be heard crying. Then they heard something large splash the water, like something had jumped into the river and was now moving towards them. The river at this point was about 4 or 5 feet deep, and they could hear whatever it was, water moving around it, like when you're in a lake and you're walking in a lake waist deep and you can hear the water rushing around you. They decided to walk down towards the river and take a look. Nate said, we were young, we weren't thinking, this was not smart. But they decided to go check at the edge of the camp, and they were just about ready to walk down, and they could see faintly in the night these trees, several trees shaking, small trees just shaking violently. And then they heard this loud, almost a screaming, and Nate described it as a chimpanzee monkey sound, but really deep. Screaming like crazy. And at this point, they looked at each other and they said, we gotta go. And they turned and they ran back to camp and they said, we need to go to the car. And they ran past the camp, up the trail for quite a ways, and then they went, oh my gosh, we forgot Ben back in the tent. They left him in the tent. So they had to turn around and come back down the trail to their camp. At this point, it was getting crazy because they could hear now what sounded like more than one, two or more, and they're just outside their camp screaming loudly at them. They unzipped the tent, got Ben out, and started running up the trail as a group. Steve was the only person that had a flashlight, and they were all following as close as possible to Steve, and they didn't want to be left in the dark by themselves on this trail, and they had a mile to go in the dark, and they could hear on either side of them movement through the brush and this sound, this screaming sound behind them as well. And they're going through the forest, didn't even take time to stop and flash the light and see what was going on. They didn't want to do that. They knew they needed to just keep moving through the forest. They're heading down this trail just about to the car. They can still hear behind them this movement through the brush, pursuing them. Very scary. They were really grateful somebody had a good flashlight, and they finally get to where they parked the car, the end of this dirt road, and Nate had a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. Pretty nice car. They all pile into it, and because when they pulled up, they were pulled straight in, they had to do this like 3-point turnaround. Back up, pull ahead, back up, pull ahead. And on the third point to finally pull out, Ben, the 10-year-old, started crying and screaming, and he yelled, "Go, go, go," as loud as he could. And Nate just peeled out of there, did like a fishtailing, kicking up gravel, and they continued down this dirt road for about 3 miles up onto the pavement and went to the nearest town, went into town and pulled into this parking lot that was well lit. Stopped the car, and they're like, "Oh my gosh." And they all started talking about this. Like, did anybody see anything? And they agreed they didn't see anything, but they all heard something. And then Nate said, "Did you guys smell that?" There was this horrible stench, like a wet dog times 50 garbage wet smell, just horrible smell. And they all smelled it. And then Ben said, "No, I saw it." "What do you mean you saw it?" "We didn't see it." And he goes, "No, when we were backing up, the brake lights lit up, and I could see this large shape right behind the car, and everyone else is looking ahead, and I saw this large shape standing there. And it was so big, it bent over and started looking in the back window. Ben was the only one looking behind. And he said, as they were pulling away, it reached out and tried to grab the car or hit the car. They weren't sure. There was so much commotion going on. They weren't sure what was going on. Crazy. And they felt safe. They're in this parking lot. It's well lit. They're far away from this thing in the forest. And so they all piled out and went to the back of the vehicle to look. There they could see it was really dusty. They didn't see any handprints or any dents or anything, but they did see some scratches. These long kind of maybe claw marks on the bumper on the left side. Not sure what it was. Could have been rock, could have been gravel from this event that they just went through. They're not sure what it was. Ben was adamant that it reached out its arm and tried to touch the car. And he also said it was just large and bushy, is what he said. They spent the rest of the night in that parking lot, just sleeping in the car. They didn't want to go home and tell their parents what was going on, and they didn't think anybody would believe them. They thought they would be called liars, and they thought, let's just spend the night here. The next morning, they got up. They actually went back to the location and got their camping gear. Packed it up as quickly as possible. But before they did that, they did go down to the river to look for some footprints. They didn't see anything. They quickly got out of there. He said after all these years, he still thinks about it. He's really not sure what happened. Because before or since, nothing like that has ever happened. He spent his whole life hunting, camping, being in the outdoors in North Carolina, and nothing like that ever happened. He has since moved away, and he says it hasn't stopped him from going into the outdoors. But he does bring either a rifle, it's hunting season, or a handgun, and he prefers to have his .357 Magnum with him. And that's actually the gun I have. It's a very heavy gun. Good gun though. He also says he rarely tells anybody about this. Even took years, several years for him to tell his wife after he got married. He's just really concerned nobody's going to believe him, call him a liar, think he's nuts, and he just doesn't want to go there. And I could understand. People aren't always receptive to your stories. And so, but he did send it to me, and there you go. That is Nate's story of his experience along the Rocky River in North Carolina. And that is my story for tonight. And this is an interesting time of night. The sun has set, obviously. Got the lantern going. And it kind of hangs around this twilight kind of light for a while. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's dark. So I got a little bit of a trek to get out of here. But it's fun to be out after dark. It's just such a nice, beautiful night. And I still got some birds over in the trees making some noise here. I don't know if you can hear them. They're some meadowlarks or something. But all right, you guys. I think I'm going to take you with on my hike back, and we'll do that. But thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys watching my channel. And if you do like stories about the strange, unexplained, and things that go bump in the night, you guys know what to do. Hit the like and subscribe and all that fun. And we got more adventures coming up. So I did not get an interview from Nate on this one, but we still might do that. So we'll see. All right, thanks again. We'll see you later. Keep hiking.
Yeah, so here's the deal. I've actually already shot this video.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I liked your story so much, I just decided to go with it this weekend. And,
good deal.
Up into the Sierra Nevada and found a really cool spot in this meadow up there, and had a really good hike up there.
Talking about beer, I'm kind of like you with that, so I was going to tell you, have you ever tried a Beta, A-B-I-T-A beer?
I have not.
They got some pretty good ones. Just a New Orleans company, and if you ever get a chance to try it, they got one called Andy Gator. You'd probably love it if you're shooting something near a swamp.
Yeah,
it's Andy Gator and Purple Haze.
Yeah, that's. I do mostly local beers because I just go to my local grocery store, liquor store, even Walmart, or wherever they sell beer, and then I always look for the, kind of unique handcrafted beers. But I'm, kind of getting to a point where it's starting to run out. I always find something, but it would be good to go online and just look at different breweries in different parts of the country and get a whole new direction and flavors.
Yeah, we live here in Huntsville, Alabama now. Transferred here from Lubbock, Texas. About 5 years ago, and Huntsville's like the brewery capital of Alabama. It's
really?
There's so many IPAs and home brews and stuff down here. Yeah, it's really good. If you ever see anything straight to ale, a Beta, some of that stuff, Yellowhammer. Yeah, it's real good.
Right.
But anyway, me and my wife love your channel. Matter of fact, I'm sitting here on YouTube. I was like, I guess if Chris got anything different on today.
Well, it's coming up. It's going to be your story, though. So,
okay, well, good deal.
Probably add this call to it at the end. And I think, like I said, I don't really need you to retell the entire story because I got your story. It was really well written in a nice order of things and sequence and things. But quite an experience you had. How old were you guys when this happened? I know you were teenagers.
Let's see, we were sophomores in high school, so I was 16. I think the other older boy with me was 16. We had a 15-year-old because he wasn't driving yet, and then, of course, the little brother we got forced to take along with us.
Yes, the 10-year-old, yes. Now, I gave you guys different names just because you kind of mentioned, don't want to be associated with it. And so the 10-year-old is named Ben.
Okay.
And
that's a good name.
you're named Nate.
Okay.
And I have no problem people knowing because that's what we need to do is keep it anonymous or whatever, or just simple, which is just a first name and just a state, right? Because that's as simple as you can make it and still have it be correct.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
So what? I just I have some questions about, not questions like I'm doubting your story, but what was that like? I understand the rock throwing right at the beginning. There was the first one, and you kind of brushed it off or whatever because you thought maybe it was a tree branch. And then there was a second one, and then your friend got up and threw a rock back, and then you guys all started throwing rocks, thinking possibly it was somebody messing with you. And then what happened, more specifically from you, after it was in the brush and the other side moving across the river, and then all of a sudden it got into the river?
Like I said, you could hear come down. To kind of paint a picture for this river is not like the ones out west. It's one of them old meandering southern kind of, we call them rivers, probably a big creek in some parts of the world, but the trees almost overlap the river. And so when the first splash hit, a lot of times you'd see like squirrels and things in the trees. And if there was an old limb or something, they could make it fall and it would go splash. So the first splash was kind of like, probably nothing. The second splash was like, maybe somebody's just messing with us. And so that's when the rock throwing started. Apparently, whatever was over there, and I'm not saying it's a Sasquatch or I have no idea, but whatever was over there didn't take kindly to it, so the bank was probably 3 or 4 foot off the water line, and whatever it was went into the water. And you couldn't see it. It was pretty thick, but it sounded like if you were walking in a lake, maybe you were up to our thighs, just kind of, walking after a ball or doing something that slosh, coming across. It sounded like a person, but the water there was fairly deep. If I had went in it, I would have probably been up to my waist, just guessing. So it wouldn't have been thigh. It would have been my my belly or my chest pushing the water. It sounded odd, and then of course everything else started happening. The noise was, I never heard anything like that, and I had been in the woods a lot before then. I grew up hiking. We had horses. We do trail rides. I was, even before I drove, my idea of a good weekend was taking my German Shepherd and a backpack and go camping by myself out in the boondocks. So I had never been scared of the woods, never heard or seen anything like that, which was really the unnerving part. I didn't know what it was. And like I say, it was just a angry kind of screech that it was making. And kind of like I'll just say it. I mean, kind of like a primate, kind of like a chimp will make them kind of, when they're really ticked off, they'll make that screeching sort of stuff, except it was deeper. So I don't know what it was.
So after you heard that, you guys, and you said this was not a good move. It was probably youth and inexperience or something. But you guys started making some moves towards the river to kind of see what was going on. And then whatever it was, it sounded like it was at the shoreline on your side now, and it started moving the trees. Can you describe that? And it was night, so how did you see the trees or the bushes or whatever it was? Small trees.
Yeah, it was night in that the sun had gone down. There was kind of some hills or small cliffs where the river had cut a bend out, what we were messing around in earlier before it got dark. So the sun had gone down, but it was twilight getting dark. And there was kind of ambient light or moonlight, I guess, coming up. That hazy, not complete dark, but dark.
Sure.
Darker.
That makes sense, yes.
And so you could see something like a tree move or shake. You could see the movement of it, and hear it. It was more hearing than anything. But we were camping near it was an old wagon train road, or a old road probably back in the 1800s, I'm guessing. And so many people had been across the river in this area. There was a natural ford there. There's some hard rock that didn't wash away. And but the little trailhead, and you couldn't drive on it. It's the reason I stopped a mile or so away where the gravel stopped is it went down and went across. So there was riverbank that was kind of up over this 2-track kind of deal going down to the water. And like I said, whatever was sloshed around, come up to the shallower side, and the trees were shaking. There was screeching, and we it was one of those things. It was like, I don't know what the heck this is. And of course, being teenage boys, we started out being, we're gonna kick your butt and throw rocks at us, yelling, throwing rocks back. So crap, we better run. And the little 10-year-old, like I said, he was the smartest one of us all. He said, the heck with that. And he went and zipped himself in tent.
Yeah.
He didn't want part of it. And we took off, and the 10-year-old's brother was like, oh crap, where's Ben? Ben's in the tent. And there was, I got to get it, run back and got him. And like I said, things were making noise and shaking trees up to the car. And
that's a mile away.
Yeah.
So it was the entire route. Now, when you came back to your camp, did they kind of surround? Because I knew you had to come back to get Ben from the tent.
Yeah, and we hadn't gone too far. We kind of started out of the little flat area we were in up the trail, and was like, oh no, and come back to get him. So we hadn't been that far, but it did sound like there was more than one of them that had come across, and I feel pretty certain if whatever it was, if it had wanted to hurt us, it could have. I mean, I just, then it felt like something was going to hurt you. Now it's kind of like, I guess if it had wanted to, it could have. But so we got the little one and kind of pulled him along up the trail and tossed him in the car, and we got in there. And like I said, I had no idea that we was going to need to leave until morning. So
of course,
just pulled nose in, which was actually easier because the little trail you walk off of it was easier to grab stuff out of the trunk. And so I had to do this, 57-point turnaround to get out. That's when a little one, screaming, sobbing. And again, at the time, it's like his little brother, shut up, back there. And we were all scared, but nobody wanted to sound like they were scared. And he swore up and down there was something that kind of stooped over and looked at the car, he could see in the brake lights. And
wow.
Like I said, he said he felt the bump. There were gravels flying. I backed into a few little saplings, and we got out of there. But when we looked, there was clearly something. But I can't say if it was something scratched a bumper I backed into, or I guess I'm trying to make excuses for what it wasn't. I don't like things I can't explain.
Yeah, you're trying to not say definitively one way or the other, but there was definitely something on the bumper, and he definitely saw something in the back window. No, do you think he was had his head turned and he was looking, and then everyone else was looking straight forward?
Well, it was like I said, it was 69 fastback Mustang.
Yeah.
And if you remember those, it had that sloping window in the back. And he just had plopped down, got tossed in there and laid with his head looking back. Just kind of how kids will do, how they'll lay in the seat and they'll start looking back. And he was looking back, and I don't know if he turned to see better when I was backing up, because it was, forward, reverse, forward, reverse, forward, reverse.
Yeah.
And he may have looked back. The other guys, the guy in the front seat with me was more or less like, what the hell was that? I'm like, I don't know, man. Let me get out of here. And the other one in the back seat was kind of, if I remember right, it's been years, was kind of leaning between the seats like, hey, go, dude, what in the world? And how boys were, we were just chattering. Nobody was really looking back except the little kid.
Sure, you're trying to get out of there and just,
little kids, like I said, he was squalling, and southern word there, he's crying and just making all kinds of noise, and it was like, just be quiet. And but when he stopped sobbing, he was literally, had we call it the snubs, sobbing. And once he finished with that, he's like, hey, I saw it. It was bushy looking, had a, he described like. And that was before anybody would have had access to a ghillie suit and I mean, it was, and really nobody would have known we were down there. It was just one of the things. And the other side of the river could go on for miles. I mean, you really have to want to mess with somebody, know they were there to come and get wet, and
especially late at night, and then go into the river and do all that, and then No, it sounds like classic behavior of what I've heard for quite a while now, as far as, escorting you out of the forest and stuff with, rocks, tree shakes, sound, stomping.
And that's the oddest thing. My wife had told me, years ago, she goes, you got to write that down. And I'm like, eh. She goes, no, really, you ought to write down. The kids will probably like to hear one day. I'm like, okay. Yeah. And that was well before, a lot of the BFRO shows and that got to be real popular. And I started watching some of them, and I would look and I'd be like, hey, they do throw rocks. I mean, they do. And but all of this would have been 1982-ish.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So well before, I mean, there were no Bigfoot shows.
Of course.
The only Bigfoot thing that was out there was the Legend of Boggy Creek, and I remember seeing that to drive in with my parents.
Yeah. Or In Search of with Leonard Nimoy on TV.
In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, yeah.
Yeah, which was random. It could be UFOs and all kinds of things, and then they would have one or two on Bigfoot.
But nothing, like it is today. And my experience fell in line with what some other people have experienced.
Of course.
And it's just, but I can't overemphasize how, and I'm used to the West too. I mean, when we lived in Lubbock, we spent a lot of time camping in Paladuro or past Amarillo, or I would drive up to Denver, Raton, New Mexico. I'm used to that open area, but this area I grew up in was thick, green. I mean, really, really dark, deep woods. If that makes any sense. Not like
it does.
And I'm certain something could potentially live in there. I mean, it's a very remote part of the state. There's.
Yeah. You've mentioned that you still go into the forest and do activities and stuff. And
I do.
You bring guns. You usually have a gun with you, is what you said?
I do. I do a lot of solo hiking. Like I said, we live in northern Alabama now, and there is a lot of trails in the area. And I carry it just because you never know what you're going to run into out there. I'm not looking behind every tree for Bigfoot at all. But you just never know. And I feel comfortable with that. If I was with 4 or 5 people in a public campground in my truck there, I really don't, would feel that much of a need to be armed, except for maybe some crazy people. But by hiking by my lonesome and some of these places around here, I feel better carrying one.
That is a good point to have.
Yeah.
So, any other thoughts about that experience that you had?
No.
How you think about it now, or outside of it?
Well, the older I've got and the more time I've spent in the woods, I really just think of it as something very unique. Very rarely, I mean, like I said, I spent a lot of my time in the woods, a lot. And even when we lived in South Texas, a lot of time in the brush country. And never had that happen before or since. So I kind of see it as something unique. It's nothing I ever expect to happen again, but you never know. It's not from the lack of being in the woods and being out.
Well, it's really interesting that you had, your 2 friends and their little brother with you. So, you got that confirmation for yourself.
Yeah, if it had been one of the trips when I was by myself, I probably would have got out of there and not even said anything. Back in the 80s, people would be like, "Oh, how much dope were you smoking?"
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't, and I don't. But people would probably be like, "Oh, did you steal some liquor from your dad's liquor cabinet?" And all that.
Yeah. No, it was very much you're either lying, you're making it up, you're on something, or you're crazy. Or something really happened.
And of course we didn't say anything because in high school you didn't want to be the Bigfoot guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Guys,
and you got your story and stuff. So all right, well,
going out with girls, they're camping with each other and seeing Bigfoot. I mean, they would just arrive.
Exactly. So, well, I really appreciate you sending in this story. You did a really good job writing it all out.
Thank you.
It's very, very clear and what you